The first hint of dawn was just beginning to bleed into the sky, a soft watercolor of muted grays and pale blues that seemed to whisper secrets. Edwards Air Force Base stood as a sentinel in the vast California desert, a complex of steel and concrete that housed some of the most advanced aircraft and most extraordinary pilots in the world. But even in this realm of technological marvel, some stories remained hidden waiting. Sarah Matthews moved through the hangar with a kind of practiced invisibility that took years to perfect. At 35, she was a study in controlled motion. Every step calculated, every gesture purposeful. Her flight suit, pressed to military precision, seemed to blend into the shadows of a massive aircraft around her. To the casual observer, she was just another pilot preparing for another mission. But Sarah was anything but ordinary. Her hands, calloused from years of handling complex machinery, moved with a surgeon's precision as she performed her pre-flight checks. The F-22 Raptor before her was more than just an aircraft. It was an extension of herself. Stealth technology personified, much like the woman who had piloted. Each touch was a conversation, each movement a carefully choreographed dance of human and machine. The hangar hummed with a low electric energy. Mechanics moved about their work, the distant sound of radio chatter, creating a backdrop of controlled chaos. But Sarah existed in a world slightly apart, observant, but detached, present, but not quite there. Her left hand momentarily adjusted. Her flight gloves, and for a brief second, a tattoo peeked out from beneath the sleeve. It was small, intricate, the kind of design that could easily be mistaken for a decorative piece of art. But to those who knew, it was anything but a simple piece of ink. Years of military service had taught Sarah the art of becoming invisible. In her early days as a pilot, she had learned that standing out could be more dangerous than any mission she'd ever fly. Women in military aviation were still fighting for every inch of respect, every moment of recognition. And Sarah had decided long ago that her skills would speak louder than any attempt to prove herself. Her background was a carefully curated narrative. Born in a small town in Montana, she was the daughter of a commercial pilot and a high school mathematics teacher. From an early age, the sky had called to her not as a romantic notion, but as a precise mathematical challenge. While other girls collected dolls, Sarah collected aviation manuals, memorizing technical specifications and aerodynamic principles. The path to becoming a fighter pilot was never easy, especially for a woman. She had graduated top of her class at the Air Force Academy, breaking records and shattering expectations. But success came with a price. The more exceptional she became, the more she learned to fade into the background, a paradox that defined her entire career. Her service record was impressive, yet deliberately unremarkable. Missions completed, citations earned, but nothing that would draw unnecessary attention. She was the pilot commanders trusted for the most sensitive operations, the one who could be counted on to get the job done without seeking glory. The tattoo on her arm was her only true secret, a mark that told a story far more complex than her carefully constructed professional persona. It was a memory etched into her skin, a reminder of a mission that existed only in whispers and classified documents. Most would see it as just another piece of military Inca decorative mark that many service members collected as a rite of passage. But this was different. As she completed her final checks, Sarah felt something in the air, a tension, an anticipation that she couldn't quite explain. Her intuition had saved her more times than she could count, a sixth sense honed through years of high stakes, missions and split-second decisions. The other pilots around her moved with their usual morning routine. Coffee in hand, last-minute equipment checks, casual conversations that masked the serious nature of their work. But Sarah remained focused, her mind already processing potential. scenarios, potential risks. Her reputation was built on being the pilot who could handle anything. Unpredictable weather conditions, equipment malfunctions, high-risk extraction missions. She had seen it all and survived. Always survived. The tattoo continued to rest against her skin, a silent witness to a story that had never been told. A story that connected her to a past she had worked tirelessly to keep hidden. A past that was about to catch up with her in ways she could never have anticipated. As the first rays of sunlight began to penetrate the hangar, casting long shadows. Across the gleaming aircraft, Sarah Matthews finished her pre-flight preparations. She pulled her flight gloves tight, adjusted her helmet, and took a deep breath. Another day, another mission, another opportunity to disappear into the vast, unforgiving sky. Little did she know, today would be different. Today, a ghost from her past was waiting to be awakened. The safe was nothing special to the untrained IA. Standard military-issue filing cabinet, tucked away in the corner of Jack Reiner's private study. But its contents were anything but ordinary. Each file inside represented a mission that officially never existed, a world that operated in the shadows between international diplomacy and raw survival. Jack's hands, mapped with a network of scars that told stories of close calls and impossible survivals, moved methodically as he reviewed the documents. At 40, he was a living legend within the Navy SEAL community, a man who had seen the darkest corners of global conflict and emerged changed, but unbroken. His journey hadn't been a typical path to military service. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Jack was the son of a steelworker and a nurse. His childhood was defined by discipline, hard work, and a burning desire to do something meaningful. While other kids dreamed of sports stardom or corporate success, Jack saw the military as his calling away to make a real difference in the world. The walls of his study were a testament to a life lived on the edge. Photographs in muted frames captured moments of intense complexity. A black and white image of his team in a nameless mountain range. Another showing a helicopter extraction, in conditions that looked more like a painting of chaos than a photograph. Each picture held stories that would never make it to official reports. His first deployment had been a baptism of fire, a counter-terrorism mission in a region so volatile that most maps refused to acknowledge its existence. Jack learned quickly that survival wasn't about heroics, it was about precision, teamwork, and the ability to make impossible decisions in milliseconds. The classified files before him were more than just documents. They were a chronicle of missions that existed in the thin space between national security and international incident. Operations so sensitive that their very existence could destabilize governments, spark international conflicts, or erase careers with a single leaked page. Jack's mind drifted to the mission that had changed everything. 15 years ago, in an operation so black, it didn't even have an official designation. He had been part of a joint special forces team that had pushed the boundaries of what was possible. 12 of the most elite operators from various military branches, selected for their unique skills, their ability to think beyond conventional warfare. He remembered every detail with crystalline clarity. The mission had been a complex extraction retrieving, critical intelligence that could prevent a potential global catastrophe. The kind of operation that would never be celebrated, never be acknowledged, but could potentially save millions of lives. The tattoo was more than just a mark of that mission. It was a covenant, a silent promise made between survivors who had seen too much, experienced too much, to ever return to a normal life. His wife, Elena, understood better than most. A former intelligence analyst, she had seen enough of the world's hidden conflicts to know that some stories were never meant to be told. Their marriage was built on a foundation of unspoken understanding, that some secrets were carried in silence, Some burdens shared only through a look, a touch. Jack's current role as a senior training coordinator for special operations put him in a unique position. He was responsible for preparing the next generation of Special Forces operators, teaching them that true heroism was about more than just physical prowess. It was about mental resilience, about understanding the complex moral landscape of modern warfare. The files before him represented more than just missions. They were a weight, a responsibility that few could truly comprehend. Each document was a reminder of lives saved, lives lost, and the impossible choices made in the span of a heartbeat. As the morning light began to filter through the study's windows, Jack's fingers traced the edge of a particularly sensitive file. The mission that had connected him to Sarah Matthews was more than just a military operation. It was a defining moment that had changed the trajectory of both their lives. He thought about the tattoo, a design so specific, so laden with meaning, that only a handful of people in the world would truly understand its significance. It was a marker, a silent communication between those who had been there, who had survived when survival seemed impossible. The sound of his phone interrupted his thoughts. A message from a secure military communication channel. Something was happening. Something was about to change. Jack Reiner had learned long ago that in his world, nothing was ever truly coincidental. The appearance of Sarah Matthews, the resurfacing of a mission long thought buried, these were not random events. They were connected, and he was about to find out exactly how. His steel-gray eyes hardened with determination. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. He had been ready his entire life. The ghosts of forgotten missions were about to speak. The Joint Special Operations Training Facility was a marvel of modern military engineering. Located in the high desert of Nevada, it was a complex that seemed to shimmer between reality and mirage, a place where the world's most elite military units came to test their limits, to push beyond what most considered possible. The massive hangar looked more like a cathedral of technological warfare than a training ground. Massive screens displayed tactical scenarios. Holographic maps flickered with real-time data, and the air hummed with an electric tension of potential energy. Representatives from every branch of the military had converged for Operation Nighthawk, a critical training exercise designed to test the most advanced joint operation protocols. Sarah Matthews stood near the briefing area, her posture relaxed, but alert to contradiction that defined her entire career. Her flight suit, a sleek combination of advanced materials and military precision, seemed to absorb the ambient light. To the casual observer, she was just another pilot. But to those who truly understood the complexities of special operations, she was anything but ordinary. Jack Reiner was mid-briefing, his voice cutting through the background noise with the precision of a laser. Years of special operations had given him a commanding presence that demanded attention without effort. He was explaining a critical extraction strategy, a complex scenario that involved coordinating multiple special forces units across a simulated high-risk environment. The room was filled with the military's best. Navy SEALs, Air Force pilots, Army Rangers, Marine Corps Special Operations. Each unit represented the pinnacle of their respective branches. Holographic displays mapped out intricate mission parameters, while advanced simulation technology allowed for unprecedented levels of tactical training. The key, Jack was saying, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room, is understanding that no plan survives first contact. Adaptability is our greatest weapon. It was at that precise moment that everything changed. Jack's eyes swept across the room, moving from one operator to another, assessing, analyzing, and then they locked on to Sarah Matthews. More specifically, they locked onto her left forearm, where a small portion of a tattoo peeked out from beneath her flight suit sleeve. The world seemed to stop. His professional demeanor fractured like brittle glass. Words caught in his throat, his carefully maintained composure dissolving in an instant. To tattoo those intricate lines, that specific pattern, it was impossible. Absolutely impossible. "Matthews," he whispered, so quietly that it should have been lost in the ambient noise of the facility. But in that moment, it felt like a thunderclap. Heads turned. Conversations died. Something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Sarah noticed immediately. Years of special operations training had honed her awareness to a razor's edge. The change in Jack's demeanor was subtle to most, but to her, it was as obvious as a flashing beacon. Something had triggered a response, something deeply personal, deeply significant. The tattoo was more than just ink. It was a marker of silent communication between those who had shared something extraordinary, something that existed only in the margins of classified documents, in the whispers between operators who had seen too much. Around them, the training exercise continued. Holographic displays continued to flicker. Tactical information continued to scroll across screens. But for Sarah and Jack, the world had narrowed to this single moment of recognition. Years of carefully constructed barriers began to crack. Memories that had been buried deep, memories of a mission, so sensitive that its very existence was a closely guarded secret, started to bubble to the surface. The other operators began to notice something was wrong. Subtle glances were exchanged. Professional curiosity mixed with a hint of concern. In their world, unexpected reactions could mean anything: a potential security risk, a hidden connection, a story waiting to be uncovered. Jack's mind raced. The mission, the team, the impossible choices they had made. The tattoo was a covenant, a silent promise made between survivors who had experienced something that would forever separate them from the rest of the world. Sarah remained outwardly calm, but internally, her systems were on high alert. She recognized the look in Jack's eyes. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of other survivors, a mix of recognition, shock, and the weight of unspoken history. The training exercise continued around them, a backdrop to this moment of profound personal revelation. Tactical simulations played out on massive screens. Special Forces operators moved with practiced precision. But for Sarah and Jack, the world had been reduced to this singular, charged moment. Something was about to break. A story that had been buried for 15 years was about to resurface. And nothing would ever be the same again. The tattoo continued to rest against Sarah's skin, a silent witness to a past that was about to become very, very present. The secure briefing room was a study in controlled tension. Soundproof walls, state-of-the-art security systems, and windows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sarah and Jack sat across from each other, the space between them filled with 15 years of unspoken history. Military personnel had cleared the room, leaving only a single digital recorder standard protocol for any high-level debriefing. But this was no ordinary debriefing. This was a reckoning. Jack's hands, mapped with a network of scars, rested on the polished metal table. Each line told a story: missions completed, lives saved, impossible choices made in the span of a heartbeat. His steel-gray eyes never left Sarah's face, searching for something beyond the professional veneer she had perfected over years of military service. "The tattoo," he began, his voice low and controlled, "is more than just a mark." Sarah's response was measured, practiced. Some stories are better left in the past. But they both knew that was a lie. The truth had a way of demanding to be heard, of breaking through carefully constructed walls of silence. The tattoo was a complex design, intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on the light. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like an abstract piece of art, but to Sarah and Jack, it was a map, a code, a silent communication between survivors of a mission that officially never existed. 15 years earlier, they had been part of a 12-person special operations team, A joint mission so classified that its very existence could destabilize international relations. The kind of operation that lived only in the margins of top-secret documents, whispered about in the most secure military briefing rooms. Their mission had been simple on paper. Extract critical intelligence from a region so volatile that most maps refused to acknowledge its existence. But nothing about that mission had been simple. Sarah remembered every detail with crystalline clarity. The mountains that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. The communication systems that failed at critical moments. The impossible choices they had been forced to make. "We thought everyone was gone," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, laden with memories of loss, of survival against impossible odds. The tattoo was their covenant. A silent promise made between those who had survived when survival seemed impossible. Each line, each curve told a part of their story, a story that had been buried deeper than most classified missions. Sarah's mind drifted back to that mission. The team had been a carefully selected group, the best of the best from various military branches. Navy SEALs, Air Force pilots, Army Rangers, Marine Corps, Special Operations. 12 operators chosen. For their unique skills, their ability to operate in the most challenging environments imaginable. They had been tasked with retrieving a set of encrypted drives. Intelligence so sensitive that its exposure could potentially trigger a global conflict. A kind of mission that existed in the thin space between national security and international. Incident. But something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. Of the 12 operators, only 3 had survived. Sarah and Jack were 2 of those 3. The third remained a ghost, a name they had been forbidden to speak, a presence that existed only in the most classified of records. "The drives," Jack said, breaking the silence. "Do you still have them?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her side, to a place where a hidden compartment had been surgically integrated into her body during a procedure that officially never happened. "Safe," she responded. A single word that carried the weight of years of secrecy. The digital recorder continued to capture their conversation, a silent witness to a story that would never see the light of day. Each word, each pause was a potential threat to national security. Around them, the military facility continued to operate. Tactical displays flickered. Operators moved with practiced precision. But in this room, time seemed to stand still. Jack leaned forward, his movement deliberate. "They're going to come for us," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Sarah's response was immediate. "Let them try." The tattoo continued to rest against her skin, a silent marker of a past that was about to become very, very present. Each line told a story of survival, of impossible choices, of a mission that had changed the course of global politics in ways that would never be acknowledged. Their connection was more than just a shared mission. It was a bond forged in the crucible of extreme circumstances, a connection that transcended typical military protocols. Typical human experiences. The world outside the briefing room continued to move. Missions would be planned. Operations would be executed. But here, in this moment, Sarah and Jack were connected by something far more profound than any military operation. A story was about to be told. A story that had been waiting 15 years to break free. And nothing would ever be the same again. The classified briefing room transformed into a time machine, pulling Sarah and Jack back to a mission that had been locked away in the deepest vaults of military memory. 15 years earlier, the Hindu Kush mountain range, a region so treacherous that even the most advanced satellite imaging struggled to penetrate its labyrinthine terrain. This was not a place for conventional warfare. This was a battlefield that existed in the shadows between geopolitical chess and pure survival. Their team had been a carefully constructed mosaic of the military's most exceptional operators. 12 individuals, each selected not just for their technical skills, but for their ability to make impossible decisions in microseconds. Sarah remembered the mission briefing as if it were yesterday. A windowless room deep beneath a secure military installation. A kind of place that didn't officially exist. Maps projected holographically, showing a terrain that seemed more like a nightmare than a geographical reality. The objective was deceptively simple on paper. Retrieve a set of encrypted drives containing intelligence that could prevent a potential global catastrophe. But nothing about this mission was simple. The drives contained something far more dangerous than anyone outside the immediate team could comprehend. Proof of a conspiracy that stretched across multiple international intelligence agencies. A network so complex that its exposure could trigger a global conflict that would make previous wars look like diplomatic disagreements. Jack's voice cut through the memories. We were never supposed to find what we found. Sarah nodded. The memory was etched into her very DNA. Their team consisted of the most elite operators from every major military branch. Mike Rodriguez, a Marine Corps special operations expert with a background in advanced communications. Elena Petrova, a former Russian Special Forces operative who had defected and become one of the most valuable assets in U.S. military intelligence. David Chun, an Air Force tactical intelligence specialist who could decode encrypted systems faster than most computers. The mission had been planned with surgical precision. Multiple contingency plans, backup extraction routes, communication protocols that changed every 17 minutes. But plans, as they knew too well, were the first casualty of any real operation. They had inserted via a custom-modified stealth helicopter, a machine that existed only in the most classified military documentation. No radar signature. No heat signature. A ghost moving through one of the most monitored pieces of terrain on the planet. The first signs that something was wrong came 36 hours into the mission. A communication intercept that shouldn't have been possible. A frequency that didn't exist, according to any known intelligence mapping. The drives, Sarah whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to the surgically integrated compartment in her body, were more than just data. They were a map. A blueprint of a global network that would fundamentally change everything we understood about international intelligence. Jack's eyes darkened. A network that connected intelligence agencies, private military contractors, and shadow government operations across 3 continents. The kind of information that could topple governments, start wars, or prevent them. Their insertion point had been a small valley nestled between mountains that seemed to breathe with a malevolent intelligence. Rocky terrain that swallowed sound. That made communication almost impossible. The kind of place where technology became useless and human instinct became the only real weapon. The team moved with a precision that bordered on telepathic communication. Each member knew their role. Each understood the stakes. But nothing could have prepared them for what they would discover. The encrypted drives were just the beginning. Hidden within layers of military-grade encryption was a web of connections so complex, so potentially devastating, that its mere existence challenged everything they understood about global politics. We lost half the team within the first 48 hours, Jack said, his voice flat. A statement of fact, not an emotional revelation. Sarah remembered each loss with painful clarity. Mike Rodriguez, who had a daughter waiting for him back. In San Diego, Elena Petrova, who had defected from her home country to fight for a set of principles most people couldn't even comprehend. Their survival had been a combination of skill, luck, and something that bordered on the miraculous. The tattoo they shared was more than just a mark. It was a covenant, a silent promise between survivors. Each line told a story of survival, of impossible choices made in the span of a heartbeat. "They're going to come for us," Jack said, echoing his earlier statement. But now, with the full context of their mission hanging in the air, The words carried a different weight. Sarah's response was immediate, calm, calculated. Let them try. The encrypted drives continued to exist, a potential nuclear option in a global intelligence landscape. Proof of a network so vast, so interconnected, that its exposure could rewrite the geopolitical map. Their mission had been more than just a military operation. It had been a moment that could have changed the course of global history. And now, 15 years later, that moment was about to be revisited. The tattoo continued to rest against Sarah's skin, a silent marker of a past that was about to become very, very present. The secure communication room was a fortress within a fortress. Walls lined with electromagnetic shielding, communication systems that could detect the slightest electronic intrusion, air filtration that could neutralize any potential chemical threat. This was where the most sensitive conversations in military history were held, and where Sarah and Jack were about to tear open a wound that had been festering for 15 years. Elena Reiner, Jack's wife, and a former high-level intelligence analyst, sat at the far end of the table. Her presence was both a strategic advantage and a potential liability. She understood the complexities of classified operations in a way few people could comprehend. The third survivor, Jack began, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. We never talked about him. Sarah's response was immediate, calculated. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. But they both knew that was no longer an option. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Advanced monitoring systems tracked every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, a landscape of secrets and survival. Their conversation was a delicate dance of revelation and restraint. Each word carefully measured, each memory a potential explosive device. David Chun, Sarah said finally. The name hung in the air like a ghost. The Air Force Intelligence Specialist. Jack's fingers traced a pattern on the table, the same geometric design that formed their tattoo. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He was never supposed to survive the mission. The story began to unravel like a complex piece of intelligence. David Chun had been more than just another team member. He was a linchpin, a specialist who could decode systems faster than most supercomputers. But he had also been something else, something far more dangerous. The drives weren't just intelligence, Elena interjected. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who had spent years navigating the most complex intelligence networks. They were a map, a blueprint of a global network that connected intelligence agencies, private military contractors, and shadow government operations. Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to the surgically integrated compartment in her body, the place where a piece of that intelligence still resided, encrypted, waiting. The mission in the Hindu Kush had been more than a simple extraction. It had been a moment that could have rewritten global power structures. 12 operators, 3 survivors, and 1 individual who was never supposed to walk away. David Chun had discovered something during the mission, something that went beyond traditional intelligence gathering. A network so vast, so interconnected, that its mere existence could topple governments, start wars, or prevent them entirely. He made a choice, Jack said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A choice that saved millions of lives. But it cost everything. The story emerged in fragments, painful, precise, a narrative that existed in the spaces between classified documents and unspoken agreements. David had discovered a network of intelligence operatives who were manipulating global conflicts, not for any single government, not for any single ideology, but for something far more complex, a system that transcended national boundaries, that operated in the shadows of international diplomacy. The tattoo, Sarah said, was our insurance, our covenant. Each line of the intricate design told a story A map of their survival. A code that could only be understood by those who had been there. Those who had survived the impossible. Elena's analysis was clinical, professional. The network David uncovered wasn't just about intelligence. It was about control. Global manipulation. On a scale that most people couldn't even comprehend. Jack leaned forward. The movement was deliberate, calculated. They're going to come for us. For the information. For the drives. Sarah's response was immediate. Let them try. The room filled with a different kind of tension. Not fear, not anticipation, but a profound understanding of the stakes. David. Chun had made an impossible choice 15 years ago. He had found a way to neutralize the network without exposing it completely. A surgical strike that saved millions while protecting the delicate balance of global intelligence. And now, that choice was about to be revisited. He's still out there, Jack said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Sarah nodded. The third survivor. The ghost who had orchestrated their survival. The one who had understood the true complexity of their mission. Outside, the desert continued its eternal vigil. Military aircraft moved silently across the sky. Entire worlds of intelligence and counterintelligence operated in plain sight and in the deepest shadows. Their tattoos continued to rest against their skin, a silent marker of a past that was about to become very, very present. The confrontation had begun. The truth was about to be unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The storm brewing was more than meteorological. It was political, tactical, a perfect convergence of forces that threatened to tear apart everything Sarah and Jack had spent 15 years protecting. Within hours of their initial briefing, the machinery of international intelligence had begun to move. Not with the dramatic flair of Hollywood espionage, but with the calculated precision of a global chess match where lives were nothing more than expendable pawns. General Marcus Holloway arrived at the secure facility like a force of nature. 62 years old, with a career that had navigated the most treacherous corridors of military and intelligence operations, he was a living legend. His reputation was built on making impossible decisions, on protecting national interests at any cost. Matthews. Reiner, he said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate with contained energy. You've just opened Pandora's box. The briefing room transformed into a war council. Screens flickered with encrypted data streams. Satellite imagery mapped potential threat zones. The room itself seemed to pulse with a dangerous anticipation. Elena Reiner's analysis cut through the tension. The network David discovered isn't just a simple intelligence operation. It's a systemic infrastructure that spans multiple continents, multiple government agencies. Removing it would be like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. Jack's hand traced the tattoo on his arm, a muscle memory born of years of keeping secrets. We were never meant to survive that mission, he said quietly. And now, we're the only ones who can prevent what comes next. The stakes were beyond traditional military understanding. The encrypted drives that Sarah had protected for 15 years contained more than just intelligence. They were a blueprint, a map of a global network that could destabilize entire continents with a single eyes. Revelation. Pressure mounted from every direction. Intelligence agencies began to move. Quiet investigations were launched. Career-ending threats were whispered in secure communication channels. Sarah understood the game better than most. Her survival had always depended on her ability to remain invisible, to be the operator that no one noticed. But now, invisibility was no longer an option. They'll come at us from every angle, Elena explained, her analysis clinical and precise. Professional discreditation, financial destruction, potential physical elimination. The network doesn't leave loose ends. The military's response was immediate and multifaceted. An internal investigation was launched ostensibly to verify the information, but in reality, a method to control the narrative. Jack and Sarah were simultaneously protected and isolated, valuable assets that needed to be contained. General Holloway's strategy was complex. "We'll create a narrative," he explained. "Something that explains your connection without revealing the true nature of the mission." But they all knew the truth was far more dangerous. David Chun's role became the central mystery, the third survivor, the ghost who had orchestrated their survival without their full understanding. His actions 15 years ago had set in motion a chain of events that was now reaching its critical point. Intercepted communications suggested he was still active, still moving through the shadows of global intelligence networks, a phantom that no one could fully track or understand. The tattoos they shared were more than just a mark of survival. They were a communication system, a code that could only be understood by those who had been there, those who had survived the impossible. Potential scenarios were war-gamed, potential responses mapped out with mathematical precision. But the true nature of the threat remained elusive, a global network that operated beyond traditional intelligence paradigms. "We're not just talking about preventing a conflict," Jack said during one of the secured briefings. "We're talking about preventing a fundamental restructuring of global power dynamics." Sarah's role became critical. The encrypted drives she had protected for 15 years were now the most valuable and dangerous intelligence asset in the Jim's asset world. The pressure was relentless. Professional investigations, subtle threats, career-ending maneuvers that would destroy most operators. But Sarah and Jack were not most operators. Their connection ran deeper than professional training, deeper than the mission that had originally brought them together. They were survivors. Individuals who understood that survival was not just about physical preservation, but about protecting something far more significant. As the days passed, the noose began to tighten. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries began to move, not with open conflict, but with the subtle manipulation that defined high-stakes global operations. David Chun remained the wild card, the ghost who had set everything in motion. His actions 15 years ago had created a time bomb that was now about to detonate. "He's still out there," Sarah said during one of their most secure communications. "And he's waiting." Jack's response was immediate. "Let him come." The tattoo continued to rest against their skin, a silent marker of a past that was about to become very, very present. The world was about to change, and they were the only ones who could prevent it, or ensure it happened exactly as planned. The final act began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A secure communication came through on a frequency that officially did not exist. The encryption was so complex that most modern decryption systems would have collapsed trying to process its first layer. But Sarah Matthews and Jack Reiner were not most people. David Chun's message was precise, calculated, a chess move that had been 15 years in the making. "It's time," the message read. 3 words that would change everything. The location was carefully chosen. A remote research facility in the mountains of Colorado. A place that existed on no official maps. A location so deeply classified that its very existence was a secret known to perhaps a dozen people in the entire world. General Marcus Holloway understood the stakes better than most. The network they had discovered was more than just an intelligence operation. It was a systemic infrastructure that could reshape global power dynamics with a single piece of information. Sarah stood at the window of the secure facility, watching the mountain landscape. Snow-capped peaks stretched into a steel-gray sky. The world outside looked peaceful, unchanging, but everything was about to change. Jack moved with the precision of a special operations veteran, each step calculated, each movement purposeful. Alana stood nearby, her analytical mind already mapping out potential scenarios. "He's coming," Jack said, not a question. A statement of fact. The encrypted drives that Sarah had protected for 15 years were now the most dangerous piece of intelligence in the world. A blueprint that could topple governments, expose global manipulation networks, or trigger conflicts that would reshape continents. David Chun's plan had always been more complex than simple exposure. He understood that information was a weapon far more powerful than any military arsenal. The network they had discovered was a living, breathing entity, a global system of manipulation that operated beyond traditional intelligence paradigms. At precisely 0300 hours, the first phase of the operation began. Satellite communications went dark. Secure communication channels became compromised. The global intelligence network found itself suddenly blind, deaf, and vulnerable. Sarah removed the surgically integrated storage device, a piece of technology so advanced that it bordered on science fiction. Encrypted data that represented 15 years of carefully preserved intelligence. "We were never just survivors." David's voice came through a secure communication channel. "We were architects." The truth began to emerge. Their Mission 15, years ago, had not been about simple intelligence gathering. It had been a carefully constructed plan to create a mechanism that could neutralize a global manipulation network. The tattoos they shared were more than just a mark of survival. They were a communication system, a code that could only be understood by those who had been there, those who had survived the impossible. General Holloway watched the operation unfold with a mixture of professional detachment and profound understanding. "Some missions," he had once said, "are fought in the shadows, and some are fought across decades." David Chun had been playing a long game, a strategy that had been 15 years in the making. The global intelligence network began to unravel, not through violent conflict, not through traditional warfare, but through a systematic exposure of its own infrastructure, a surgical strike that would reshape global power dynamics. Jack's hand found Sarah's, a connection that went beyond professional partnership, beyond survival, a bond forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. "We were never just operators," Sarah said quietly. "We were a solution." The facility became a nerve center. Screens flickered with global communication networks collapsing. Intelligence agencies found themselves exposed. Shadow networks that had operated for decades suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Elena's analysis was clinical, precise. "This isn't just an exposure," she explained. "This is a complete restructuring of global intelligence infrastructure." David Chun had orchestrated everything: their survival, their protection, the careful preservation of the intelligence. A plan so complex that it had taken 15 years to execute. As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, the world began to change. No dramatic explosions, no traditional conflict. Just a systematic deconstruction of a global network that had operated in the shadows for decades. The tattoos remained, a silent marker of their journey, a reminder of a mission that had saved millions without anyone ever knowing. Jack looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Jack. No words were necessary. They had survived. They had succeeded. And the world would never know how close it had come to a fundamental transformation. David Chun's final message came through. Short, precise. Mission accomplished. The sun continued to rise over the mountains. Another day began. The world continued to turn. But nothing would ever be the same again. The tattoos remained, a silent testament to a story that would never be fully told.